Hi all, I'm happy to introduce me. I'm Dr. D. Karthika, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Computer Science, VT Institute of Arts and Science. I'm here to teach you about Python programming. So in this Python programming, we have divided the agenda into the following. We are going to see about the introduction to programming, what are the different levels of languages and the types of programming languages and translators. We are going to see what is compilers, what are interpreters, and we'll see about the introduction to Python, Python basics, where we look into the syntax, variables and data types, and the collections, which consist of list, tuples, dictionaries, and all those set of things we are going to discuss on today's class. So introduction to programming. So we all know that programming is a concept that exhibited due to the need. So it is a process of creating or making the instruction to perform some task. So we have the instructions. So instructions are the steps what we are going to get followed. So that steps should be like a recipe for a chef. And the code execution, where you going to write a programming language in a computer. So it's going to perform some task, and that task is going to give some output. So, and you have the specific task also can be performed using a programming language. So normally in a programming language, we have input, and the input have to get processed and we'll obtain certain output as a result. So why do we want to learn programming? So programming helps us to do automation, so which is the need of today's hour. So in automation, when the task have to be repeated again and again, that can be done as a part of automation. And we have innovation, and today we are coming across so many apps and websites where the innovations been mastery today. And you have career opportunities which is wide open in the area of programming. And finally, the creativity where your ideas get life. So I'll have an example of a programming concept. We have a number is equal to 5. We have assigned a number 5 to a variable num. So now you're going to find the square of the number. So it is num into num, which produces the square of the number 5 being stored in a variable square. And finally, we need to execute it. So this has been an input. As I said, this has been an input, and this has been a processing step. And finally, we are obtaining the output through the step print square, which produces the output of 25. This is a simple mean of programming. So we'll give a difference between what is a program and what is a software. A program is a single unit of a code. Maybe like we can consider an example of VLC media player, where each and every unit in the VLC media player is called as a program. For example, we have a play button, we have a stop button, we have a rewind button, we have the adjustment of volumes. All those are the single component of the VLC media player, and which is called as a code. And finally, when that collection of that program being combined together to form as a software. So there are different types of solution for the software. Like you have the multiple programs combined together to form a software, as I discussed in the previous example of a VLC media player, where you have different set of single programs combined together to form a software. So like you can also use the software to get the simplest complex task to get resolved, and also it provides a full solution for a problem. So some of the examples of an software, like as I discussed, we have VLC media player, like you have Microsoft Word. So all those are some of the examples of software. Okay, so levels of programming languages. We have 3 different levels of programming languages. As we all know, computer is just a box. It doesn't have any idea of programming concepts. So what the language that a computer can understand is just zeros and ones, and we call that as a binary language. Zeros and ones are called as the binary instructions to a computer. Other than that, your computer doesn't understand A, B, C or anything else given to a computer. So whatever the in words or characters or symbols you are given to the computer will get converted into zeros and ones with the help of ASCII conversion. So now you have the next level of language, which is called as the assembly language, where it uses the mnemonic codes which is very close to the hardware. And finally, you have high-level languages, which is sort of English-like languages what we are using in our regular day life. So like you have Python, Java, C++, which is very readable, and also it is abstracted from the hardware. So these are the different levels of programming languages. Machine level, which is a low level language, and you have assembly language, which we uses the mnemonics for coding, and you have the high level languages, so where the user readable formats is given here for the programming. So like the different other types of programming languages are, you have procedural language, object-oriented language, functional programming language, and scripting languages, where the procedural programming language you completely deals with the modules or the procedures, which is an example of C, Pascal, and Fortran, all comes under your procedural programming languages, where the code runs based on the modules. Then come your functional programming languages, where the mathematical functions being used for the computations. Here you have examples like Lisp, Haskell, etc. And you have object-oriented programming languages, where your code is basically depend on the object. So your examples here are Java, which is a pure object-oriented programming language, and you have C++, which is partially object-oriented programming language, and also you have Python. And scripting languages, like where your system automates the task. So like HTML, you have JavaScript, you have Python, Bash. These are some of the examples of scripting languages. So as I said in the previous slide, we have the different types of programming languages, like you have machine language, and you have assembly language, and finally you have high level languages. When a user gives an input to a computer in the form of A, B or C, whatever it can be, your computer doesn't understand whatever the words or the characters or the symbols given by a user. So that have to be translated into a machine understandable format. For that purpose, we are going to use the translators. So we have different types of translators, like compilers, interpreters, and assemblers to perform this task. And particularly, we are going to look into two different types of translators, which is compilers and the interpreter. So here, as a translator is considered, when an input is given by the user, the input will be translated into a machine understandable format. We know that what is a machine understandable format? Zeros and ones or the machine understandable format. In that, we are taking ASCII into a picture for the conversion purposes, and that zeros and ones are called as the binary code. So for that we need the translators. So compilers will take the entire program. Supposing if I am going to write a program to add two numbers in C or C++ or Python, whatever case it may be, the whole program is considered, is taken into a consideration, and it is sent completely into a compiler. So what does a compiler does before the translation is, it checks the entire code for the error. When there is some error, what the compiler does is, it gives the entire error so that the user can correct the errors, and finally it will be produced the output as the executable file. So it can be executed multiple times on any different types of compilers, different types of systems. It also promotes in the faster execution. So examples of using compiler is C, C++, Java. Whereas in Java, the bytecode being the first phase of conversion, after that it will be executed into .exe file. And when you're coming to the interpreter, so this also is a kind of translator where the program is executed line by line. As in the case of compiler, the entire program is executed at once, whereas in the form of interpreter, the line by line execution takes place. So when user program is being translated or compiled or interpreted, in the case of interpretation, the first line will be checked. If that line has some errors, we have to correct that particular line. Only then it will move on to the next line. So the difference between compiler and the interpreter is, the whole program is given as in the case of compiler, whereas in the case of interpreter, the line by line execution takes place. If that particular line has some error, the error have to get corrected. Only then it move on to the next line. So this is the basic difference between using a compiler and the interpreter. So that's what been mentioned here. No separate object file will be generated in the case of interpreter. So error shown immediately at a specific time, whereas it is easy for the debugging experience. So it is actually ideal for the scripting and interactive use. So some of the programming languages that uses the interpreters are, like you have Python, JavaScript, and Ruby. So as of now, I have given you an idea of what is a programming language and what are the different types of programming language and what is this difference between a program and a software, and also what is the purpose of using a translator in a real-time programming scenario. So now you have a comparison between a compiler and an interpreter, and you can see both the things is used as the feature for translation. So whereas in the case of compiler, the entire program at once is compiled. As I said you before, the whole program at once it is being compiled. Whereas in the case of interpreter, line by line runtime compilation takes place. The speed, you have the faster execution in compiler, whereas in the interpreter it is quite slow compared with your compiler. So error detection, it uses the full scan method where the whole program is scanned for the error, whereas in the case of interpreter, it gives you the line by line result. Once the line being executed, if there is some error, immediately it switches to the error page. So output, it generates the object file. As we discussed, you don't have any object file executed in the interpreter. So memory, so when you take the case of memory, requires more memory, whereas it requires only less memory in the case of interpreter. So debugging, it is very harder to debug, whereas in case of interpreter, it is easier to debug. So example, we have already discussed C, C++ and Java, whereas in the case of interpreter, we have Python, JavaScript and Ruby. So coming here to Python, Python is a modern programming language where being used by more number of programming people in today's era. Because like being artificial intelligence is taking a more in the bigger phase. So Python has been a buzzword in all the industry today. So learning about Python is really a pleasure. So it is developed by Guido van Rossum in late 1980s and at the National Research Institute for Mathematics and Computer Science in Netherlands. So the purpose where the Python can be used is, Python can be used as the web development. It can also be used in the software development. It can be used in mathematics and also for the system scripting, for artificial intelligence and data analytics. These are different applications where the Python can be used. So basically, Python is a high level. As we all also discussed about the interpretation, it has been interpreted, it is interactive and object-oriented scripting language. So you always have to remember the keywords. It is a high-level programming language. We already discussed about the high level. High level is a way where the user can give the input that is in the understandable format. We can call that as an English-like language format. So it is interpreted, it is not compiled, it is interpreted. So line by line interpretation takes place and it is interactive compared to the other programming languages, and it is an object-oriented programming scripting language where you have objects play in the case of Python. So the main key features what we discussed on Python is it is interpreted, so processed at the runtime and you don't want any compilation required, and it is interactive which uses the more prompt to test and debug directly, and it is object oriented, it supports the concept of OOPS. Then you have the broad library. You have so many number of libraries for visualizations and other mathematical functions. All those purposes we have broad libraries, and it is extendable where you can use the low-level C, C++ modules also inside the Python, and the database support, it also supports for the database purposes. So then we are going to look into variables, objects and data types. So memory is a beautiful concept that is designed by von Neumann, right? So whenever we want to do something later in a future purpose, we need something to get stored, and data is vitally plays its purpose. So when you're doing some programming concepts, like if I want to perform some additions or subtractions or some other complex task, what we require is data. So data have to get stored in a place where it can be processed and the output can be fetched, and also that data can be used in a future also. So we require a variable to store that data. So the variable we can call it as a reference to a value stored in a memory. So okay, so all variables are objects. All the variables we call it as objects. So object is a collection of data that can be manipulated, right? So objects are nothing but the collection of data that can be manipulated. Class is just a blueprint of an object which has the variables and the methods. Methods will go deeper inside what is method and what is variables and things. So methods, you have functions that act on the object. What the object can do is called as a method. So you have different types of data types here where we are working in Python. We have integer, float, str stands for string or text, boolean, list and tuple. So already we have discussed about the variables, methods and objects concepts, and we are going to see now as a real-time example here using the Google Colab. So here you can see a function called as input, which is going to get the input from the user, and it gets stored in a variable called as yes. So we call s as a variable here, and this variable is going to act on the function called as input. So now you can see I'm going to execute this. So now it is asking, prompting for an input. Maybe like I can give an input as Giri, and when you give enter, so Giri is an input that been stored in a variable called as yes. So if you want to check whether s has properly stored the value Giri, now you can execute the variable yes, and you can find the output to be displayed as Giri. So now this is one way of getting an input where the user is not given any prompt for the execution, and this is the second way of giving an input where the user is given a prompt to give an input, like it asks for what is your name. So that prompt can also be given inside the function called as input, which is surrounded by the double quotes. This is very important when you're giving an input. So as like the other programming languages, we don't want to use any data type like integer, float, and we have to declare it before in Python. So you can just directly go with defining the variable. So here your input function is going to work on what is your name. So now I'm going to execute it, and you can see that it been prompted in your output. It asks for what is your name, and here you can give your input as Rati. Whatever input you like to give, you can give here. So now this Rati is an input being stored in the variable yes. So if you want to confirm whether this Rati being stored, you can recheck it by executing the variable s again, where it gives you the output Rati, which been already given. So for reconfirming all that we have learned, we are going to use a small program here. So where n. So n is a variable, a is again a variable. So in this two concept, we call this as a user defined variable, and you don't have any certain format in naming a variable. Okay, so it should be an underscore. You can just use an underscore. A variable cannot start with a number. All those we have learned in your C, C++ is the same principles we are following in Python. Maybe like I can rechange my variable as name, and here you can see you will find an error because previously it was n and now I have rechanged it to name. So now I have to give a same variable here, like it been pop up here, and you will not have any error when you are executing this because they've been already assigned here. And for this is going to be your a is going to be your age here. So instead of a, I can use a variable called as age, and when you're using a variable called as age, you always have to remember that have to be changed when you're printing the variable also, and here this also have to get changed into age. And that's all we have done with the program. And when you're executing it, you will have your first prompt asking for what is your name. Maybe like I can give Sita, give an enter, and it gives you hello Sita is a print statement what we have given. So this is hello, comma, the variable what been used for storing the name, and next it prompt you for asking your age, how old are you. So maybe like I can give the age as 23 and give enter here, and you will get the output as you are 23 years old being printed. And here we have discussed two different types of function. One is input function, the other one is print function. Hopefully you are enjoying the videos. Maybe like we can move on to the further discussions on functions. Here we have different types of functions involved when you are considering a programming language. So first we are going to see about capitalize. Capitalize is going to capitalize the first letter of the word what you are going to give as the input. Maybe like we can execute this program. So now you have a variable called as name. It asks for the name of the user. Maybe like I can give as Jenny. So Jenny is the input, and you can see hello, what happens? I have given the input as Jenny. J started in a lowercase letter, and this name dot capitalize function, it converts that first letter in the lowercase to the uppercase letter. So this is the way it works when we are using the capitalize function. And again, like when you're giving how old are you, it works on the how old are you. You know this function, how it works. So first function what we learned is capitalize. Capitalize is used to capitalize the first letter of the word. So next we are going to see the same example. Like S is again a variable which is going to store a word called as Kartika. So now we are going to see how this capitalize function work on this particular stored variable, stored value. So now T is again a variable which is going to store the function after happening S dot capitalize. What this S dot capitalize do is, so you have a word called as Kartika here. So now this S dot capitalize is going to perform a function on this particular text. So now the first letter of this word alone is going to change into a uppercase letter. So when you're printing the variable T, you can find the difference here. We have given the input in the double quotes as a small letters, lowercase letters, and this capitalize function does the magic here. So like you can see, the first letter alone is converted into a capital case, and when you're printing this T, so that being converted into a capital case, the first letter being converted into a capital case, and it is stored in a variable called as T. So now finally you're going to print T. So in case if you're trying to print S here, what happens when you're trying to print S instead of T? So instead of T, if I'm trying to print S here, so the process being executed. So you can see that the same word what we have given is executed. So now instead of Kartika, I like to change this as Vasu. So now you can see we haven't executed T, we just have executed S here. So it just prints the same Vasu here. So now if I am trying to execute T here, and you can find the difference of using the capitalize here. The first letter alone has been converted into a capital case. So now similarly, as that of a capital which converts the first letter alone into a uppercase, you have another function called as upper which converts the entire word into a capital uppercases. So now I have so anything which is given into a double quotes is called as a string. So I have given a word here as Catherine. Okay, so now what is the purpose of this upper function? It is just going to convert this entire word into an uppercase. So when I'm executing this, you can find the difference here. So like the Catherine is what we have given in the lowercase being converted into an uppercase by using the function called as upper. So now I have another function called as, maybe like you can try storing this inside a variable and also executing this. So again you have another function called as lower. So like you can find the difference here. I have given the word in capital letters, fully of uppercase letters. When I want to convert this into a lowercase, I can do it by using a function called as dot lower. So when I'm trying to execute it, you can find that the uppercase is being converted into a lowercase. So now you have another next function here is decimal. So is decimal is a function which used to identify whether the given text is a number or a characters. So now you can find this Kartika is dot decimal, you're checking for it. You know that this is all complete fully of string. So when you're going to check for this, it will give you a boolean value. Either it can give you false or true. We know that two boolean values exist. Either it can be a true or false. But when you're checking for this 223, we know that 223 is a decimal value. So when you're just checking it with is decimal, and you can find it is going to execute, it is true. So now next one is print. So you're going to print the name.
Next one.
So moving forward, we have stored Jenny in the name. Like I'm going to write now, yes. So what is your name? At final step we have stored Jenny here. So moving on to the next one. So when you're printing a name, it is going to display Jenny. So what I want is, I want to replace the first letter J So I want to replace J with B. Right? I am going to replace J with B. So I am going to execute it now. So now what happens? The first letter J being replaced into B. So Jenny being turned into Benny. So now the other function what we have learned now is replace. Replace is used to replace the characters being given in your word. So now see, the next one is I am going to print the name, and at the end I am going to leave some space. So like when I am going to execute this, see, the name is Jenny, and at the end I am going to include Ratira, which is being given here. Otherwise, instead of Ratira, I can use here Benny. Right. So when you execute it, so name that been already here is Jenny, and at the end I'm going to give a space and I'm going to merge this and Benny inside this program. So now we have completed a few basics of Python programming, like we have discussed on what is a variable, how to store a value in a variable, and what is the use of an input function. So with the help of the input function, without using a prompt, how to fetch a data, and also with using a prompt in input function, how to fetch a data and how to print the data being stored in your variable. So using a print function. So now we have used different types of functions like capitalize. Capitalize is a function which is used to make the given word, the first letter of the given word to be get capital. So then you have uppercase function which converts the entire word into an uppercase, and the lowercase function which converts the entire word into a lowercase, and its decimal function is used to check whether the given data is a value, it is a text or it is a string or a value. Then you have a replace function. Replace function is used to replace the given character with the character we want to get replaced. And finally, if you want to add some value to get printed, that can be done with the help of end. So now we are going to discuss a small project on the functions or the variables what we have discussed till now. So now print hello word, we know that it is just going to give us the print hello word. So again, what is your name? This uppercase is going to convert, maybe like you can execute this. So I'm going to give this as Jen, and I'm executing this. What happens? I'm not just printing my name, I'm just making it into an uppercase before printing it. So what happens? So I'm given just as Jen. So this uppercase converted the whole word then into a capital uppercase letter, and it is printing it. Okay. So this is going to be your final touch up on variable and its types. So variable is a reserved location in your memory. So variable in a Python programming gives data to the computer for processing. So first you have to get the data, that is your input. So then you have to process it, then you have to produce the output. So variable plays an important role in getting the data to get processed. So basically you have different types of data types in your Python. You have integers, floats, strings and boolean. So when you're going for the variable, you have to remember few rules and conventions on naming a variable. That is actually the same what we have learned in previous programming languages. So variable names can only contain the letter, numbers and underscores, and you cannot start naming a variable with a number. For instance, if I want to print, if I am using a value 1 name, and if I am going to execute it, and you like get out with an error, because like you cannot start naming a variable with a value. So you have to remember this first of all before starting your programming language. So first rule is you cannot use a number to start with your variable, and variable name can start with a lowercase letter, and you can also use a camel case. Camel case, like you can use a capital letter inside your variable, and also snake case where you can use the underscore, where you can combine multiple words as a variable. So permitted is like you can use your letters, numbers and underscores, whereas in the same example, if I am trying to store like this, maybe like instead of starting with 1, if I am trying to give this as name 1, and I'm going to print this as name 1. So if I'm trying to execute this, so you will not have any error here, because the first rule is you cannot start your variable with number. Okay, it can end with a number, it can have a combination of number, but you cannot start it with a number. Right? So a camel case letters are permitted. So in this case, like you can have like this, like you can have this as stud underscore name is permitted. Yes, this is permitted. And when you're printing this, you also have to be very careful because you have stored the input in stud underscore name. So let's change this as stud underscore now name. So when you're executing this, you will not have any problem. So that's it. So this is a camel case of naming a variable. So when you're going for this, so this is snake case and this is going to be a camel case where you can use the capital letters in between. So here I have to change this as the same. So variables, you have to be very confident when you're doing it. So when you are doing this, you don't have any error. Okay, so you can just execute it. So we have seen different three types of conventions. One is like while using a lowercase letter for naming a variable, we have used the camel case letter and a snake case letter for naming a variable, and you always have to remember underscores and numbers and letters can be used, but it should not start with an underscore or a number. It should always start with a letter. So avoid using single letter variable except for short loops. Okay, so don't use the single letter variables. Like use when you're going to get name, just use name instead of using n. When you're going to get age, you use age instead of using a, right? So avoid using Python keywords or built-in function names as variable. When you're using when you cannot use your keywords for storing a variable. Supposing if I'm going to use this as for, okay, and again I'm going to print this as for, okay, so I'm going to execute this. See, because this is an invalid syntax because for is a keyword. Yes, for is a keyword. You cannot use a keyword for naming a variable. This is again a problem when you always have to remember when you're doing with a variable. Okay, so it can be just a name. And this also you have to change this as name for printing. Here you will not have any problem. So that is what the third one I am insisting on. Okay. So now you will not have any problem. Yeah. Okay. So avoid using Python keywords or built-in function names as variable names. And finally, variable name should be descriptive and it have to be very clear indication of what that variable represents. Okay, it should not have n or a for taking the value. It should be n for name. If it is for name, you have to give the full descriptive way of naming a variable. Here are some of the valid examples for Python naming. First underscore name is permitted, last name is permitted, student underscore count is permitted, total underscore sum is permitted. So these type of variable definitions are permitted. Okay. So now you can see S is a variable that where we have stored a string as this is a string, and A we have stored an integer value to be 2, and B we are storing a floating point value to be 2.4. So now, as that of the other programming languages, we haven't mentioned any data type before storing all these values, because we know that when you are using C or C++, we have to first initiate the variables int s. Sorry, in the case of this, it have to be a character, char or string you have to use for storing s, and also for variable a it have to be int a, and for b it have to be float. So all these things no need to be mentioned in your Python. Just I can directly use the variables directly to store the values. So this is a string, is a string, text string that been stored in a variable s. 2 is a value, been integer value stored in the variable b. 2.4 is a floating point value that has been stored in b. So now when I am checking for the type denotes what is the data type of s and what is the data type of a and what is the data type of b. maybe like I can, for differentiating, I can give P, and instead of A, I can give I, and instead of B, I can use T. So now just execute this. So I have stored, this is a string in P, and it's not IO error. So this is I. In the variable I have stored 2, and in the variable T, I have stored 2.4. Now we have to change the variables here. So this is P. I'm going to check for the type of P, and here I'm going to check for the type of I. And finally, I'm going to check for the type of T. So now you can execute this. Yeah, now you can identify an error. It shows that name I is not defined, because like previously when you're executing, it was like an IO error is equal to 2. So again you have to execute this cell before executing this cell. So when you start executing this, you can find you will not have any error. So now the P is a data type of str string, I is a data type of integer, and T is a data type of float. So that been mentioned here. So now I am giving A value to be 2 and B value to be 3. So what I am going to do is, I am going to add A plus B, and also I am going to find what is the type. So we know that A is also given an integer value, B is also given an integer value. So obviously the type is going to be an integer. So when I am executing this, so then try to execute this, you know that the type is going to be an integer. And for this example, so x value, in the x variable we have stored a value 1.1, and in the y variable we have stored a value 2.4. So now we are going to see what is the type of A and what is type of B. We know that type of A is going to be float because we have the decimal values here. Okay, because like we are trying to print A and B. A and B we know that it is an integer type, but what we have to do, we have to print the type of X and type of Y. So now when you are executing it, you will get an output float and float. Okay, so now, so you are going to add X and A. So X we know that X is a type of float and A is a type of integer. So when you are adding X and A, obviously you will get the output as float, which is in higher order. So then you come across the mathematical functions. ABS stands for the absolute. So when I give some negative value, it gives me the positive answer. Maybe like I can try with another example of like 245, and I'm executing this. So I'll get the positive value. Absolute function will return me the positive value, and POW stands for the power. So power, it gives me 2 to the power of 3. The value of 2 to the power of 3 will be fetched here. Maybe like I can try for another example. Here 3, 3, and I'll execute it, which is 3 to the power of 3. We know that 3 into 3 into 3, which is 27. So POW adds for finding the power. So now if I have given some value here, 1.34567897. So I am going to use the round function. So round function is going to round this value with 4 decimal point. I just want to make this value to get rounded off with the 4 decimal point. If I require this and I'm executing this, you can see 1.345678 has been rounded off with 57, with that 4 decimal, which means 67 been rounded off into 7. So now maybe like I can reduce this into 2. So when I'm executing this, you could see 1.34, and after 4 you have the value 5, which is 5 which been rounded into, this 4 been rounded into 5. So this is an example of round off function, power and absolute. So now I have 2 strings here. S1 stores the string I am a string, and S2 I am a second string. What you are trying to do, we are going to concatenate both the strings S1 and S2, and finally for the concatenation I am going to use a symbol called as plus, and finally you are getting output as I am a string and I am a second string. Both the strings being concatenated. So now next one is here A being declared as 1, A being initiated as 1. What I am trying to do here is I am going to add a string and a variable, I mean that a string and a integer. So when you're trying to add a string and an integer, you will get an error. You cannot add a string and an integer. So trying to add an integer, the string will result in an error. So therefore it have to be formatted. You always have to remember, for executing these sort of values, it have to get formatted. Okay. So for that purpose, we are using a F string. F string is called as a formatted string. Okay. For formatting a string, we can use F. So F is called as a formatted string. So you are going to print F stands for formatting. I am a string with an int here. We know that A is an integer value and we are going to add 2. We know that A value is equal to 1. Maybe like I can change the A value to be 3. So always remember to execute this cell, and it also errors in, you'll fetch some errors because you're trying to add a string and an integer. So now this is an F string. So when you execute this particular cell, see, you almost got the answer. What is that? I am a string with an int here. A value, we have just changed the A value to be 3. A value, we have changed it to 3, and we are asking it to add with 2, plus 2. We have just given plus 2 to add and more text. That's been printed here. I am a string with an int here. 5 is the answer we get and a more text here. So now we are using the arithmetic operators. Whether you are checking 10 is greater than 3. If 10 is greater than 3, then print B. So when you execute this, yes. So usually when you are working with the arithmetic operators, you will get the results in the Boolean form. Either it can be true or it can be false. Maybe like you can change this to 1 and you try checking this, it will be false because 1 is not greater than 3. So this bool can be used in this format also. Either I can use equal to or I can check inside your parenthesis. So this is your example of the using Boolean function. So we are now moving into a project called as calculations, where you're going to create the formulas and have some fun with the basic math. So the step 1 is make a conversion from the kilograms to LBS. So use this formula. LBS is equal to kilogram into 2.2046 is going to be a formula. So like made the cell to use this variables. Okay. So now we are going to convert the kilogram into LBS. The formula is also given. So what I have to do is I have to get an input. I am going to get an input value, and always remember, when you are getting an input value, it will be in the form of a string. That input have to get converted into an integer. For that conversion, we are using the function called as int in front of your input function. So what happens here? Given input value will be prompted to the user. When a user gives an value, it will be in the form of string, and that string have to get converted into an integer. That been taken care of this statement. Int of input function of given an input value. When you give the input value, and for example 12 is being given, that 12 being stored in your kg variable. Kg is a variable to store the kilogram. So now I'm going to find the LBS of this. So what I have done is kg into the formula is 2.2046 is the formula, right? So this have to get converted into float, okay? And now finally I'm going to round it off into 4. After 4 decimal, only I should have 4 values after my decimal point. So when you execute this, given input, I can give literally as 23, and I can give, what happens? The LBS value of 23 is 50.7058. So now if I am trying to change this into 2, so I am just trying to change this into 2, the round off value, and again it asks for the input. I am going to 23 given again. So what happens? So previously we have received 4 values after your decimal point. Now it has been rounded off to 2. So this is a small program to explain you the concept of how to convert the kilogram into LBPS using the formula that's been given. Hopefully you are okay with the concept what we have discussed till now, right? So we are moving on to the second part of the calculation, where you are going to find the circumference of the circle, okay? So the cell should define the radius, calculate the circumference by the formula. Circumference is equal to 2 into pi into r. So for the pi, we are going to substitute the value with 3.14. So pi value is being defined. Pi is equal to 14. So let the circle returns the cell returns the circumference. So at the first step we have initiated the variable pi with 3.14 that been already given in your question statement itself. So now we are going to give the radius. Okay. So what is prompted here is give the radius of the circle. So the radius of the circle is given, the question is given to the user. When the user gives the radius, your input function takes the radius, and that will be in the form of string that have to get converted into float. Okay. So after converted into a float, it being stored in the variable called as r. Now C stands for circumference. So C is equal to, what you are going to do, 2 into pi into r is a formula. 2 into pi into r is a formula. You are going to find the circumference, and finally when I am displaying the result, it have to get rounded off to 4 decimal points, 4 values after your decimal point, and that have been printed here. So now let me execute this part. So we have assigned pi value, and what it is prompting is, it is prompting for the radius. I have to substitute the value for the radius. Maybe like I can give it as 12 when I'm entering it. It gives the circumference of the circle is 75.36, and we have rounded off to 4, but actually it gives us only 2 value. Maybe like 3, maybe the input value is very low, so it gives you the output to be this. Okay, because of the input value you are getting the round off to be 2. So here the circumference of the circle is, this is called as the formatted string, where C is printed as the circumference of the circle. So your string is added with your value, with your floating point value. So with this I am going to end today's session. So happy that we have listened to a lecture on Python programming, where we have touched all the basic concepts, what is a variable and what are the different types of built-in functions that can be used in your Python programming. And also we have discussed some projects on calculations, where we have converted your kg into lbs, and also we have find the circumference of the circle. With this lecture, I want you all to try work on the basic functionalities of the Python and to come up with some idea, so that in the next class we'll be handling you on the type conversions and the future perspectives of your Python programming. And thank you for your time on visiting my lecture. Happy learning. Thank you.